Here's a picture, a very simple picture, but your next line is, well, why should I subscribe to the New World Review? And quite simply, it's to attain regular JoJo content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. Hello and welcome to JoJo 101, the series that breaks down everyone and everything in the realm of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And today we are going to be diving into one of the more prolific and influential protagonists within this grand saga, the absurdly charismatic Joseph Joestar. Joseph Joestar is the second main protagonist of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, whose tenure primarily consisted of helming Part 2 Battle Tendency. However, he would go on to play a great role within future parts and generations. In terms of lineage, Joseph is the grandson of our original protagonist Jonathan Joestar and the son of George Joestar II. However, unlike Jonathan, Joseph presents a much less gentlemanly take on life, as he is quite volatile and confrontational, as well as a generally loud and comedic persona. With that said, Joseph is also a natural-born genius who is almost exclusively able to win his various battles against significantly more powerful opponents via pure wit, which is probably most prominently on display within his secret technique, which to the untrained eye consists of Joseph quickly running and comically retreating from combat. However, its true purpose is to survey the environment around him and lure his opponents into more unfavorable conditions. As a classical Joestar, though, Joseph was raised in England primarily by his grandmother Erina, as well as his grandmother's close friend Robert E.O. Speedwagon. This was due to a family tragedy whereby his father was killed and Joseph's mother was forced into hiding after exacting retribution for George's murder. But very interestingly, young Joseph inherited extraordinary potential for using Hamon, and by the time he made his debut appearance in Battle Tendency, he was already an extraordinarily proficient wielder despite never having received formal training. And so at the age of 18, Joseph had grown into the stacked physique of his genetic namesake, and his adventure would begin in 1938, when he and Erina left England on a trip to New York. And once their shenaniganry was easy enough to find, as Joseph encountered a fearsome vampire, and not just any vampire, but a former ally of his grandfather Jonathan, and after defeating Mr. Vampire, also known as Straizo, Joseph was alerted to the existence of the mysterious man in the pillar, which threatened to be an even more powerful foe than the vampires created by the stone masks. In addition to this, Joseph was informed of the supposed death of Speedwagon, and so he went to Mexico in order to investigate, during which time he cross-dressed and discovered a Nazi research facility, you know, the standard story beats. And inside, Joseph found an alive and well Speedwagon as well as Santana, a recently awoken Pillarman who completely dwarfed Joseph in terms of general abilities. However, with the help of Stroheim, Santana was eventually defeated by being exposed to the sun, a stunning weakness that the Pillarmen shared with vampires. Very unfortunately though, there were 3 other Pillarmen still in existence in this world, and so Speedwagon ferried Joseph to Rome in order to undergo Hamon training, at which point Joseph met Caesar Antonio Zeppeli, the son of Will Antonio Zeppeli, who taught Hamon to Jonathan Joestar. And Joseph and Caesar, well, they didn't quite see eye to eye in their dynamic though, primarily because these two had very polarizing personalities, and yet at the same time they were so incredibly similar. In fact, on one occasion when they were both playing poker, both Joseph and Caesar attempted to cheat, to hilarious consequences. However, this dynamic would also forge a strong bond, which occurred after they had both undergone further Hamon training. Before that though, Joseph did manage to form another more unorthodox bond at this time with a pillar man by the name of Wamu. After discovering all 3 remaining pillarmen in a secret Roman cave, both Joseph and Caesar were easily defeated by Wamu and on the verge of being killed. However, Joseph was able to use his trademark cunning to appeal to Wamu's sense of warrior's honor and a lust for challenge by informing Wamu that he had yet to complete his Hamon training and that Wamu could only prove that he was the superior warrior by beating Joseph at his best. And you know what? That gambit worked. Joseph was spared, however, to prevent him from simply running away, both Wamu and another Pillarman, AC/DC, inserted rings containing poison into Joseph's body that were set to dissolve in a month's time, meaning that Joseph would have to become strong and skillful enough to defeat at least 2 Pillarmen within a mere month. Quite the tough ask, but in aid of this, Joseph traveled to Venice with Caesar, and they underwent intensive Hamon training under the tutelage of Lisa, who, spoiler alert, also turns out to be Joseph's mother. Although Joseph was rather unaware of this when he was spying on her naked that one time. Some very Oedipus-y sort of stuff happening here in Battle Tendency. But it's also worth noting that Joseph would meet a lady of his own in Venice, being Lisa's servant Susie Q. But more about her in a bit, because 3 weeks after Joseph's training began, the grounds were invaded by AC/DC, who would be defeated thanks to a series of fantastically implemented ideas from Joseph, and he managed to attain the antidote for one of his internal poison ring things. From here, Joseph, Caesar, and Lisa traveled to Switzerland to confront Wamu and the leader of the Pillarmen, Kars, which would lead to Caesar's tragic death at the hands of Wamu, and quite quite possibly the most emotional moment of the entirety of the life and times of Joseph Joestar, where after a profound moment of despair, Joseph once again resolved to defeat Wamuu, which he would in a Roman chariot-style duel, which was unique, and it would involve a whole host of other improbably well thought out ideas, which really is the strong suit of Joseph. But even after beating Wamuu and saving his life from the deadly poison, we still had Kars, a being who had now found his way up into impossible power, and after putting a thing in another thing, he had now become the ultimate life form. And in order to defeat this final Pillar Man, Joseph led Kars to a volcano, whereby a mighty enhanced Hamon eruption occurred, and Joseph knocked Kars out of Earth's orbit, where he would go on to float through the universe for all eternity. And then later on, Joseph went on to crash his own funeral, as well as marry Susie Q, thus bringing a rather happy ending to Battle Tendency. However, Joseph's journey was ever so far from done, and he would continue the Joestar line by having a daughter named Holly, whom Joseph treasured more than anyone else in this world, which is why when Holly grew up and moved to Japan with her husband Sadao, Joseph developed a general dislike of Japanese people, although with that said, he would go on to have an affair with a Japanese woman by the name of Tomoko Higashikata, an affair that would produce yet another JoJo. But before we get into that, at the age of 65, Joseph Joestar very mysteriously manifested an ability known as a stand, which in this case was named Hermit Purple, a funky little existence that allowed Joseph to spawn thorny vines, which were capable of conducting Hamon as well, and yeah, it sounds pretty underwhelming, but in the hands of a trickster like Joseph Joestar, it became quite an effective utility. The most important feature of Hermit Purple, though, is that it allowed Joseph to engage in divination by using an object like, say, a camera or a TV, and with a target in mind, he could then attain a picture of said target. However, the reason for Joseph developing this ability had to do with Dio, the immortal rival of Joseph's grandfather, who had resurfaced back into the world, having affixed his head to Jonathan's body and presenting the greatest enemy that the Joestar family had ever faced. However, Joseph was not the only one to develop a stand out of nowhere, as he received a call from Holly stating that her son and Joseph's grandson Jotaro had been possessed by an evil spirit. And so at the age of 67, Joseph traveled to Japan and thus began the events of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. Upon arriving in Japan, Joseph discovered his grandson in prison, having manifested a stand that would become known as Star Platinum, an existence far more powerful than Joseph's Hermit Purple, and after an altercation, Joseph explained their family's past with Dio, as well as recruited Jotaro in an effort to stop him. A big push towards this though was that Holly had also manifested a stand, which she did not possess the spirit to harness, and so it began slowly killing her, giving Joseph and Jotaro an estimated 50 days to find and kill Dio, theoretically then breaking his link to the Joestar family and saving Holly. On this journey though, Joseph would be joined by his good friend and colleague Muhammad Avdol, and these two had a good working relationship. In fact, Avdol was the individual who taught Joseph about the very nature of stands. Also amongst their group was a high school student, Oriaki Kokyuin, a man who had been previously brainwashed by Dio, or brain bugged, brain infested, I don't know what you would actually call it. But of every member within this group, Joseph probably had the least on-screen interaction with Kokyuin. However, the two had a clear respect for one another and trusted each other implicitly. Furthermore, Joseph had a tendency to bombard Kokyuin with jokes because this polite school student was the most tolerant of his foolishness. Shortly after their departure, Joseph and the group were also joined by Jean-Pierre Polnareff, a personality that was much more, let's say, agreeable with Joseph due to his goofy nature. And our final crusader would be Iggy, a stray dog and stand user as well as all-around good boy. And so this pack would travel across the world, having tracked Dio to Egypt in an adventure that would reveal how Joseph had truly changed over the years. Most evidently, Joseph no longer possessed his aggressively energetic and borderline arrogant nature, and he was instead much more calm and calculated, for the most part anyway. He was also demonstrably much more worldly and mature, as well as capable of acting as a leader, whereas our young Joseph was much more of a rogue agent. However, he did still retain his clownish nature, and often used it for the purposes of comedy in Part 3. Although with that said, he was also able to provide something of a role model for his grandson Jotaro. I say something of a role model because their personalities were polar opposites. However, in the end, these two developed an extraordinary bond, which would prove to be a formidable team going up against whatever unfortunate soldiers happened to cross their path. And that brings us to Dio, who by this point possessed a stand known as the World, which allowed him to stop time briefly and made effectively the entire band of Crusaders powerless against him, which was displayed to us when Dio mercilessly killed Kokyuin, but not before he was able to send a very valuable message to Joseph, informing our once plucky Joestar of Dio's time-related abilities. Simply knowing Dio's power would not grant Joseph any advantage whatsoever though, and after warning his grandson, Joseph was stabbed through the throat and subsequently had his blood sucked out by Dio, thus killing him. Or not. After Jotaro successfully defeated Dio, he engaged the medics of the Speedwagon Foundation to perform a blood transfusion from Dio's body to Joseph's, a process that miraculously worked and brought Joseph back to life. And even in this, the most serious of situations, Joseph's first thought was to play a prank on his grandson, pretending that he was Dio. And some classic Joseph Joestar right there. But on a more somber note, Joseph and Jotaro successfully rid this world of Dio by burning his body with the rising sun, whilst also taking the time to mourn their lost companions. Then the three remaining Crusaders would exchange a heartfelt goodbye, with Joseph and Jotaro returning to Japan in order to find a fully recovered Holly, which brought an end to part 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And while this would be the end of Joseph's tenure in a primary role, his life would go on and on. However, over the next decade, age absolutely caught up with him. Joseph began suffering a wide array of both physical and mental conditions, but during this time Joseph also lamented on his affair, which had produced a son named Josuke Higashikata, whom Joseph added to his will and attempted to use Hermit Purple to attain a picture of. However, what emerged was quite an ominous photo, after which Jotaro embarked on a journey to Morio in order to investigate, thus beginning part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. Although eventually a very frail 79-year-old Joseph Joestar would also travel to the small Japanese town where he would meet his son Josuke for the first time. And while Josuke expressly forbade Joseph from contacting his mother Tomoko, this father and son would eventually form a bond of their own, primarily through an incident involving an invisible baby. A baby that would take quite well to the elderly Joseph, and he would later adopt and name Shizuka Joestar, an act that would further estrange Joseph from his wife Suzuki, who was already livid about his affair and would likely believe that Shizuka was yet another secret love child of Joseph. And as such, Joseph would spend the majority of his time in part 4 caring for Shizuka until the threat in Morio was defeated, at which point he left the town with Shizuka and Jotaro, and that really is more or less the end of the adventures of Joseph Joestar. Some more fun facts about Joseph Joestar. Despite his last appearance being in part 4, Araki did confirm in an interview that Joseph was likely still alive by the time we reach part 6, being Stone Ocean, and this would make him 91 at the time of those events. As we've just seen, Joseph led quite the bizarre life, having taken part in defeating an immortal vampire as well as the ultimate life form. But to add to that, Joseph has also survived no less than 4 plane crashes, 2 of which being in Battle Tendency and 2 of which were in Stardust Crusaders. And finally, a truly useless fact. In part 3, there is a running gag with Joseph's prosthetic hand, where it will be periodically damaged or even destroyed, only to appear later, being completely intact without any explanation whatsoever. But that pretty much does it for Joseph Joestar. But what do you guys think? Please do let me know down in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more JoJo content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular JoJo wonder delivered straight to your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.